Welcome to Keep Going, a podcast about failure and success, hosted by John Biggs. Every week, we talk to an amazing person about a time they failed and what they learned. And remember, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Welcome back to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show, we have Keith White. He's an independent director on the board of directors for Brinks. He's also an author. Your upcoming book is called Uncommon Leadership, a blueprint for restoring integrity, trust, and people-centered leadership, which sounds like something we all need right about now. Welcome, Keith.
John, so much. So happy to be here. So glad to have you. And yeah, it's something we need to talk about. It's much needed right now.
I feel severely underdressed. You came with the blazer and the beautiful background, and I look like I'm in a trash can. But I think it'll be okay. So tell me about your experience in your career.
Yeah. So I'm a kid from Cleveland. I went to Cleveland State University and started with the Bell System back in '81 when it was still a monopoly. And so got to work there and had a rough start. We can talk about that later, but I've always been kind of intellectually curious. So I went and got an MBA in technology and went to work for IBM for a number of years. Beyond that, went and worked for Pitney Bowes. And then I got into the grocery business, surprisingly, in 2019 as president of a couple of grocery store chains and rounded out my career with Walmart, retiring about 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And this all, you came out of Cleveland, but you didn't stay in Cleveland, right?
No, Cleveland's a great place to be from. And my career, took me away from Cleveland in 1999. I found to be successful in corporate America, you had to be open to transfers. And so I've had a great career traveling and living almost all over the country. Okay.
So why don't you tell me how did you get to be picked constantly to be president, to be C-level in these organizations? Because that sounds like a great run.
What do you think you did? It's not because I was the smartest guy in the room by any stretch of the imagination. I think what happens is early in my career, I worked for a lot of companies going through change and transformation. Think AT&T before the breakup of the Bell System. Think of IBM when it was transforming from a hardware software to a solutions manufacturer. Think of Pitney Bowes when first class mailing was going away and they were trying to reinvent themselves. And so I touched a lot of bases. I worked in sales, I worked in marketing. And so you get to a point where you have enough battle scars and enough experience where you begin to leverage that. So I became known as a change agent, transformation specialist, and that opened up a lot of doors for me.
Mm-hmm. What does it mean to be a change agent, especially right now, especially considering that almost everything's changing, right?
Yeah, it's very tough now. I mean, if you think about it, when I started working in corporate America, there was no email. There were no laptops to speak of. And so technology has been ever changing. Of course, this latest iteration with AI is like, change on steroids. But in its core, every organization is changing all the time. Some are just forced to change and some have to change, to survive. And so it's being able to go into an organization, looking at where they are, helping determine where we need to go and putting plans and strategies in place to get there.
Can you tell me a story about a time that you didn't do all that? A time that you feel that you didn't reach your potential in a case?
Yeah, I think that the textbook example for me was IBM. I, again, had a degree in IT, was working at IBM and leading an organization of sales and account managers. And while I was always in the top 10% of sales leaders, I wasn't getting promoted. And, I got a little pissed off and, you're young and you're cocky. And, I told my boss, well, if you don't promote me in 3 months, I'll promote myself. And he said, sure, kid. And 3 months later, I resigned and took a job somewhere else. But the learning was one of my workers, who was an older gentleman, he said, Keith, can I tell you why you didn't get promoted at Walmart? At IBM. Mm-hmm. And I said, why? He said, you were a bull in a china shop. You got great results, but you abused your people. You didn't get along with finance. You didn't get along. It was all about you, your team, and winning. And that's not the culture here. And he says, you're never going to be successful anywhere if you just continue to be this corporate bully and this bull in a china shop. And that stung. Mm-hmm. That kind of hurt, but that was my first aha of, really the work is about people. It's through people, and respect for the individual really, really matters.
Why do you think you were the bull in the china shop at that point? Was it just youth? Was it, what were you trying to prove by being angry, I suppose?
So here's what it was. It was less about being angry, more about emulating the leaders who had come before me. So I had a lot of leaders who were that Theory X military, hardcore, rough and tumble leadership. And so I thought that's what success looked like. You couple that with the fact that I was typically younger than the people that I was leading. And so somehow I felt I had to kind of beat my chest to get them to understand. And so it was really, I would call it the immaturity of youth that kind of led me down that path. And, fortunately, before I got to 30, I kind of realized I had a problem and began to address it.
How do you do that? How do you look inward and see? Because I mean, there's plenty of managers out there who are still just still pounding their heads against stuff. How do you look internally and see where you're doing wrong?
There's a couple ways. I was fortunate enough to a company hired an executive coach to work with me to help me identify those blind spots and why they were there, because they were coming from something. And it could have been everything from some childhood issue I had with trauma of not being listened to or not being heard, to the imposter syndrome of feeling like, wow, do I really belong here? I'm in here with these people from Harvard and Yale, and and so it was overcompensating. And once I realized that would hinder me from my ultimate plans to be, a C-level leader, I had to take the time to look in the mirror and say, okay, Keith, some of this you're doing to yourself. Mm-hmm. And it was humbling, but I'm glad I went through the process.
Tell me a little bit about the book, Uncommon Leadership.
Yeah, Uncommon Leadership, the blueprint to restore trust, integrity, and people-centered leadership, was really, to me, written from a place of just disappointment with leadership today. I have a 15-year-old grandson, and he came to me about a year ago and said, Pops, I see stuff happening with pastors getting kicked out of churches and elected officials doing this and corporate leaders doing that. That's not what leadership is it? And I had to think about that, because somewhere along the way, John, we moved away from servant leadership, where it was about the people, to self-serving leadership, where it was about us. And we got to get back to focusing on people, developing trust, and acting with integrity.
How do you get somebody to act with integrity when they're in power and they're beholden to forces beyond their control? I mean, shareholders, bottom line, the accounting department, that kind of stuff. I mean, obviously you want everybody in that sort of position to think, okay, well, I'm going to do the best for the most ethical thing. But we're also looking at a world where the shareholders can you for a down quarter. How do you prevent that?
Yeah, well, and that's a great point, because one of the challenges of why we got there was that this whole mission around, the quarterly return and shareholder value, and not that those things aren't important, they are, but two things can be true. You can deliver those results with people on board with you, as opposed to, again, pawns in a chess game. And so it really, focuses on understanding, I don't care who you are, your success is driven through people. When I ran 100 Walmart stores for Walmart, I had 30,000 people report to me. Mm-hmm. If they didn't do their job, I was not going to do my job. And so it's really kind of understanding that you get more engagement when you're people-centered. You get more productivity out of people when you're people-centered. And ultimately, the bottom line is increased because, again, they're doing this thing because they have to. It's not because they have to, because they want to and they're engaged.
How do you convince your team? Like, how do you convince a whole team at Walmart to start thinking in that way?
That's a great story. And I'll share with you. I got to Walmart in 2015 when it was struggling. It was Amazon was kind of, really chomping away at the market share. Their grocery business was struggling, and they had a long, proud history. And what I did was I painted an analogy for them, because I think sometimes people don't change, John, until they kind of have a burning platform. And I shared my story of my time with the company that, in 1977, when I worked there in college, was the number one retailer in the world. Any idea who that was, John?
Oh, is JCPenney or Sears?
It was Sears Roebuck & Company. And I shared with them this story. I said, if you think about it, Sears was Walmart and Amazon at the same time, because they had their brick and mortar stores, but they also had this thing called a Walmart catalog.
Sears catalog, yep.
Yeah, where you can Sears catalog, where you could order and have it delivered to your home, picked up, and somewhere they lost their way. And I said, we've got to make this change and this transformation. We got to pivot from what we've always done, brick and mortar, again, to this omni-channel thing. And if we don't, here's going to be the problem. But more importantly, and this is where a lot of leaders miss it, I had to connect them to the vision. Here's why this is important to you. Here's how you can help us get there. Hey, we want you to be clean, fast, and friendly. We want you to thank our customers, because if a customer has a great shopping experience, two things will happen. They'll come back and they'll actually buy more. And so by helping them understand, hey, we can't continue what we're doing or else we'll end up like Sears, that here's the way forward and here's how you can help us get there. And that really drove engagement and adoption of to the point where the stock, when I started, was probably $60 a share. It got to 100, split. Now it's about 115 again.
Interesting. So this was 2015, right? When you looked at these folks, and it was that hard to convince that group of people that they needed to do this omni-channel thing.
I mean, you got to understand, the whole machinery around Walmart was the stores. Mm-hmm. Right. There's 5,000 Walmart stores in this country. And so, there was always the focus on the store, which was not wrong. But they were under the fear somehow that this e-commerce thing would cannibalize the store and people would stop shopping. And so it took them, sticking their toe in the water and then finally, hiring some outside talent and jumping in full force. And I will tell you, they will tell you it's the best thing that's happened to Walmart, quite honestly. So it was a learning thing. But again, their whole history was that store. And they do the Walmart cheer and those types of things. And there was fear about jobs, right? Will I lose my job? Well, what they found out was that, this opened the door to new jobs, everything from, stocking to driving. So it really has evolved. And I think now anyone who works there during that period looks back and says, wow, we had to make that change.
This sounds a lot like the AI revolution right now, right? It's like, this happens almost every time you get some sort of switch. The mobile phone came out, everybody went crazy. And then you realize you have I don't know, you basically turn into online Walmart sort of things because it's super accessible. What do you think happens in the AI world when it comes to this? People are worried about losing their jobs. They don't want to use AI. It's too expensive, et cetera, et cetera. What happens in the next 5 years that shows that humans are resilient?
Yeah, well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I've been around, and I will tell you, to your point, humans are resilient. And I think that, when you think about AI, it can do a lot of administrative tasks, but what it can't do is the, empathy with people. What it can't do is, strategically, help understand where to move. The example I use is, AI will tell you that a tomato is a fruit. But common sense would tell you don't put it in a fruit salad, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that, we have to learn to work with the technology. There's certain things it can't replace the human touch. The judgment piece, isn't there. And so while I will be honest, there are times I stay awake at night wondering how, it could go wrong. I think that the potential to really empower people to get rid of the mundane and focus on innovation and creativity, I think it's still there. But again, it's yet to be determined.
You have a grandson. What would you say to him so he can have a career as varied and successful as yours?
Well, the first thing I would tell him is one, be a continuous learner. You have to have that intellectual curiosity to always be learning. I would tell him, and we've talking about it because he's looking at colleges now, to, not necessarily focus on any one particular skill set. I'm going to be an accountant. I'm going to, but be somewhat liberal in your studies to kind of cover all the bases. So many things. We talked about AI, coding jobs, those things may get taken over by things like AI. And so I wouldn't lock in on any one particular discipline per se, unless your heart's just in medicine or something like that. But be flexible, be a continuous learner, and look for ways to add value. There are always organizations looking for people who want to add value.
If folks are looking for work right now, obviously there's a middle management sort of like desert out there when it comes to being hired. What have you spoken to anybody who has some advice on getting hired at these places on the same trajectory that you were in, right? Seems like you kept on climbing the ladder, and it seems like a lot of people are kind of stymied right now.
And I think that's the challenge that, when I came along, it was more of a climbing the ladder. I think now it's more of a lattice where, you'll make step improvements up, you'll go up a step in one area, maybe move to a different department, move down. So I don't think it's the linear, you keep going anymore. I will tell you, you got to stay current to remain relevant. That's the one thing that I think a lot of us, we get that degree and we kind of rest on our laurels. You'll get left behind, always be learning, always be listening, as I say. But again, always look for ways to add value. I was the guy who would take the tough assignment that nobody else wanted. There were markets I would go to, I'll never get one time I was offered an opportunity in Detroit. None of my peers wanted to go to Detroit. Raised my hand and said, hey, I'll go to Detroit. I'll do it. And so you be willing, be flexible, be mobile. But again, sticking to that whole theme of continuous learning and intellectual curiosity, you got to just be able to roll.
So when is the book coming out?
Book will be out in about 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Looking forward to it. It's, I think, my best work because it was kind of written from the heart. It was sharing leadership philosophies, not just my own, but I interviewed CEOs, former sitting CEOs, to get other perspectives on really what we need to get this next generation ready for as far as leadership, because it's what we're doing now isn't sustainable.
And you've also got corner office rules. Swag is not enough. You've got loads of books here. So what should people be reading outside from the brand new one?
I would always say, my first love was the best one. That was called Good Is Not Enough. And what that really was saying, that, when you get into the workplace, so much of what we were taught as kids about success was if you learn your ABCs, you got a gold star. When you count to 100, you got an apple, whatever it was. And that performance was the overall key. But the reality is you can be a top performer, but there are two other things that you need. One is performance, and that's 50% of the equation. 25%, I would say, is exposure. Are you exposed to the right people? Are you exposed to the right information? And the reason I say that, John, is this in the people business. Nobody breaks through the glass ceiling on their own. Someone who's already on the other side of that ceiling has to see you, appreciate the value you bring, and pull you through. So that's the second leg. And so a performance, exposure, and then last, perception. What is your brand? We all have a brand, whether we realize it or not. People know what to expect or not to expect based on prior performance. And so the question is, do you know what your brand is, and are you managing that brand? And there's an analogy I can't give anymore because kids are too young, but I say I'm a car guy. So if I said, ultimate driving machine, most people would say BMW. If I say sexiest car on the road, somebody might say Ferrari or Tesla. But if I say Yugo, what comes to mind? Mm-hmm. It was an old Yugoslavian car, and the joke was, sometimes you go, sometimes you don't. And so I said, inside your organization, are you the BMW, the Lexus, or the Yugo? And you've got to know what that is and manage that. So those are kind of the three pillars of good is not enough that I think really transcends industries, and organizations, because you need to manage all three.
Well, folks should head over to Keith Wyche, UYCHE.com. You can pre-order the book right now, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all that other good stuff. I'm looking forward to reading when it comes out. So thank you, Keith.
Thanks, John. I appreciate the conversation. Have a great day.
This has been Keep Going. I'm John Biggs. We'll see you next time. All right. Perfect. Thank you for listening to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. Remember, Keep Going is entirely listener supported. If you're listening to this, please head over to keepgoingpod.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast for as little as $5 a month. This is a labor of love, and every little bit helps. Thanks for listening.
Pacing back and forth for 27 months. I wouldn't have known how to love myself if you didn't break my